Hello everyone, it is July 21st, 2020. This is Dr. Chris Martinson here with your SARS-CoV-2 update. Can you catch coronaviruses over and over again? Yes, of course you can. We'll present the data as well. We're going to be going into a personal account from a doctor who had COVID, so they're going to talk through what their symptoms were and the kinds of precautions that they're taking. And as well, the world is now approaching 15 million confirmed cases of COVID. Is this thing over? Not yet, not by a long shot. Come on, join me. Let's go take a look at the data. We'll get started on it right now. I've titled this one, Why You Can Catch Coronaviruses Over and Over Again. We're going to look at a really incredible study that spanned just like a forever amount of time. Like it's a 10-year-long study that really gets at that question. But first, of course, the numbers, counting by the millions now. We're nearly 15 million confirmed cases, over 615,000 deaths for this SARS-CoV-2 virus, creating the Covid-19 disease. But look at this 15 million. We're getting numb to these numbers now, right? I mean, 14 million, 13, 10 million, whatever. Someday we may be counting by whole twos or fives or even tens of millions. We don't know. But I just want to reground us where we were on February 1st, 2020, when I was reporting this. This comes from the February 1st update. We got this out of WuFlu Live, but look how quaint these numbers are. This is when we were reporting this, saying, hey, this is going to be a really big deal. People mostly weren't believing it at that point in time. Why? Because, look, we hadn't recorded any deaths outside of China. Maybe one here in the Philippines, but there was some confusion about that one. Look at these numbers. 20 cases in Japan, 19 in Thailand, 18 in Singapore, 15 in South Korea, and so on and so forth. And it really looked like we were going to see these South Asian countries just get walloped here. But they didn't in many cases because they ran really good campaigns, mostly including a lot of face masks and good public health measures and things like that. And so they really did manage to keep the curves flattened pretty heavily in those countries. But this is just to remind us, I mean, we're talking 14,968,301. Just the 301, that would have been big news back here in February 1st. All right. I think we still have a long way to go if antibodies are going to be a reasonable guide to how we get past this whole thing. And so if we look here, this is the seroprevalence. So sero, that's the serum in your blood. Prevalence, well, how many people have these things. So the seroprevalence is how much antibodies are detecting in a population of people. Seroprevalence of antibodies to SARS-CoV-2 in 10 sites in the United States. Up through May 12th. So this is a little bit old. We don't know what these numbers might look like today in places like, say, Florida, or if it was rerun again with maybe the better tests that we have today that are a little bit more accurate, higher sensitivity, higher specificity. Don't know yet. But when we look at these numbers, what we're seeing here is that first, what do we notice? This says 9% of the population is this top line. So nobody's showing up with more than 10% of the population reporting a seroprevalence here. So that's part one. And we would want to see much, much higher numbers before we would say, due to antibody prevalence, we're close to herd immunity. Now, I'm going to soften that a little bit because we've done the T-cell work on the prior video that came out. And that T-cell work says, hey, there's another type of immunological response your body can have, which doesn't involve antibodies, which still can confer some degree of protection. And of course, big mystery to unravel, right? Because we know that very young children, the younger the better, they seem to have almost like a superpower immunity against this thing. It doesn't bother them. Coronavirus does not bother them, whereas it wallops other people. But even still, taking the data for what it is, over time, what did we see? I mean, generally speaking, I don't know how you would draw that line, or whether that makes much difference, but here we had Western Washington only clocking in at about 1%, South Florida at this time clocking in at about almost 2%. I bet it's higher now. Everybody from Connecticut on down at 5% or lower. And just New York clocking in at the highest with about a 7% rate of seroprevalence. Now, this isn't necessarily such great news because we know now that your antibodies will peak within about 2 weeks after having a serious case of COVID-19 and begin to fall off after that. So it could be even that if this was rerun in New York City, depending on this, just how sensitive the test was, It may be that we actually see New York's numbers falling over time. That's a possibility because people who currently have antibodies are going to be losing them over time, and maybe the people who had them back here in March, maybe they've already begun to lose them. And I'm going to show you some data around why we might suspect that based on other coronavirus cases. All right, moving on. Here's an interesting study that's this is a math-based study. This isn't a study of humans. This is people who build models for a living out there in the UK. And so, hey, we all know sometimes the models work really well. Sometimes they've let us down. But at any rate, take it for what it's worth. This one, levels of herd immunity in UK may already be high enough to prevent second wave, study suggests. So that's interesting. And I think that's a distinct possibility. And I'll show you why in the data in just a second. So here's what that article reads as. It says, quote, levels of herd immunity within the UK may already be high enough to prevent a second wave of coronavirus. New study by Oxford University scientists suggests the researchers posit that some of the population may already have a high level of immunity to COVID-19 without ever having caught it. All right, that's a very interesting concept right there because it speaks to, the T-cell immunity. That means you've been exposed to other coronaviruses. Your body saw those other viruses, managed to luck onto finding a highly conserved portion of those other viruses that when you came along and were exposed to COVID-19, your body said, hey, I've already seen this. I already know how to mount a response to this. I've already defended myself against this. So that's a really good sign in this story because it means that there is such a thing. It would imply, we don't know this for sure yet. Let me be careful about my language here. But it would imply that there is a way to tune the body to have a competent response against SARS-CoV-2. And maybe we can do that by being exposed to other coronaviruses. And maybe if we could figure out exactly which portions of those other coronaviruses are important, maybe we can either give ourselves, expose ourselves to the common cold in a tuned way, or find a way to deliver those epitopes, those portions of those other coronaviruses to our bodies so that our bodies will then mount a response against COVID-19. Pretty cool. So that's hopeful. In a paper yet to be peer-reviewed, they point to evidence suggesting exposure to seasonal coronaviruses such as the common cold may have already provided some with a degree of immunity and note that others may be more naturally resistant to infection. We have already covered this paper right here. We're a big believer that this is the T-cell paper they're referring to. Love that one. I like this too, that others may be more naturally resistant to infection. Of course, if your body's terrain is properly prepared, your body has all the things that it needs, like firefighters that have helmets and breathing apparatus, and they've got axes and hoses, and they've got their boots, right? If you give your body all the protective equipment it needs, of course, it's going to be able to fight the fires better in this analogy. And so that would mean things like making sure your vitamin D levels are appropriate levels and other things like that. All right, quote, continuing. Modeling how different levels of pre-existing immunity between individuals could affect the overall threshold needed to prevent a resurgence of the virus, they found that this could be as low as 20%. That's wicked low, as low as 20%. Now, I looked at this paper way over my head. It's just a lot of math and equations and formula, and I don't really have any way of assessing that to know if they've done this well, done it poorly. I don't know. I'm just presenting what's being reported out there so you have some context for it, but I can't shed a lot of light on these highly mathematical papers, sorry to say. It is widely believed that the herd immunity threshold, or HIT, required to prevent a resurgence of SARS-CoV-2 is in excess of 50% for any epidemiological setting, but they're saying it could be as low as 20%. And I like this idea too, which says between individuals, pre-existing immunity between individuals. And by the way, it turns out some individuals are super spreaders. And we don't know if that's because of their behaviors, because, they're just very huggy, touchy people, or there's something about how their vocal cords are configured that just vibrates virus particles out into the universe, or if they just are people who shed virus particles more easily because of their viral load or other things about their body chemistry and makeup configuration. We don't know. But so it could be that getting this down to the individual level is kind of important. And I think here's why I think this actually, there's a lot of credence to this. So I had to cherry pick a little. I went into this next database and I just selected countries that had shapes that looked like this. So here you can see countries that have managed to deal with this thing. So this would be Pakistan, Spain, France, Germany, Italy, South Korea, even the Congo, right? These are all countries that take some form of this shape, right? Even Pakistan's managed that. And I say even because, of course, they have a healthcare system that's, you would think, other countries such as the United States ought to be able to, and Mexico ought to be able to equal that or better that, but not so much so far. The United States is just having a really bad time of it right now. I got to laugh about it. It's really comical how bad it is at this point. It would be more comical if it wasn't so tragic at the same time. Lots of people are being very seriously injured and even killed by this thing. But this is the basic shape. And so we see this over and over again in lots and lots of different countries. And so this is arguing for the idea that there's some kind of natural immunity that's coming along. It's not like Pakistan, Spain, France, Germany, Italy, and South Korea all ran similar strategies. They had very different strategies, and yet they had very similar experiences with the shape of their curves as the disease came and went. But still, I think, nonetheless, no matter, you still want to make sure even if this is the natural shape it's going to take eventually, you want to be smart about it, right? You still want to be smart about how and when and why COVID sweeps through your community. And so what I'm basically saying is you don't want to be like Mike Parsons, Governor Mike Parsons out of Oklahoma, saying, these kids have got to get back to school. And if they do get COVID-19, which they will, and they will when they go to school, they're not going to hospitals. They're going to go home and they're going to get over it. Wow, is that an insensitive comment? I mean, who knew looking at that face right there? I mean, that's clearly a face of a very caring individual here. But just joking. He looks angry for some reason in this picture. But what about the teachers? What about the people living at home with those kids who may, or even the kids themselves who may not get over it because they have some sort of a comorbidity of some kind or immunocompromisation or something like that? This goes down as one of the least smart quotes out there. That's an embarrassment right there. All right, one quick, I'm just going to touch on this very quickly, but Gummy Bear 737 over on Twitter hand-assembled this really handy chart, and it's looking at the country's case fatality rate by country here by hydroxychloroquine usage. And so these are countries that don't have any chloroquine use, and they're suffering anywhere from around 5% on up to 19% case fatality rates. Mixed HCQ use, you can see here that, somewhere from, I don't know, maybe a high of 7% down to a low of about 2%. And then these are all countries down here who do use hydroxychloroquine kind of very much on the front line. And interestingly, I want you to notice this very last one. If you can't read it down here, this is Costa Rica. I thought Costa Rica was really going to get spanked on this thing. They started to get a lot of cases, and then they applied hydroxychloroquine use very, very early on. And again, when do you use hydroxychloroquine? Listen, if you get exposed to COVID-19, the SARS-CoV-2, it's got about a 5-day period when the virus is going to really be going through its replicating cycle. If you give hydroxychloroquine after that, kind of limited effect. I mean, I think there's still a few things hydroxychloroquine might do. We give it to people who have, say, lupus or rheumatoid arthritis. Why? Because those are autoimmune diseases. And so obviously hydroxychloroquine is able to help moderate autoimmune diseases. I think we could think of a lot of the impacts of COVID-19 as autoimmune diseases, where your body is attacking itself, not just through the fabled cytokine storm, but through lots of other very subtle sorts of ways. So hydroxychloroquine clearly has some sort of a use, but Costa Rica brought it in. Look at this. You would think that whatever Costa Rica is doing, whether it involves hydroxychloroquine or some other thing, you would think that some of these countries over here to the left would come on over, or look at the United Arab Emirates here, or look at Qatar, or look at Oman, or Israel, or any of these other places and say, what are y'all doing, right? Because that's how medicine should work. If you're over here on this end and you're suffering, 5 to 15%, awful sort of mortality rates, maybe you should wander over to the right side of the chart and ask a couple questions. I think that would be the smart thing to do. All right, looking at the data as it stands, the CDC just released a pretty interesting big summation of who died in the United States and of COVID. And so looking at this, first thing we're going to do is we're going to look at this by race. Really interesting. I think there's a lot here to look at because we see here in the Hispanic Latino side down here that if you are under 65 years of age, where you are in this white open rectangle here, that about 35%, so call it a third of all people who died who were Hispanic were under the age of 65. In fact, more people died who were under the age of 65. And that's the exact opposite of white non-Hispanic here, where we see this behavior where about 40% of the people who died were over 85 years of age, and I don't know, call that 12% or so of the people who are under 65 years of age. A whole lot of people unknown in this story. And then non-white, non-Hispanic, again, about 30-some percent under the age of 65, and actually fewer people who are older. So that's very interesting, and I think it needs to be looked at for all sorts of things. But there is some explanation. The CDC also broke this down by looking at the comorbidities and mortality data by race here. And so what do we see here? Here we see this is everybody under the age of 65 who died. So that's 2,681 that were gathered here. Over the age of 65 was 7,966 overall. That's 10,647 to look at. And then they broke them down over 65 into these three groups here. 65 to 74, 75 to 84, and over 85. So as well, looking at the race or ethnicity here, what jumps out at us is that we see here that this 33.9% here, that's clocking in for the under 65 group here. And then we can compare that here with, look at the number of people who had at least one or had more than one underlying medical conditions. That's 83% here. And more than two underlying medical conditions, it's 61%. And then three or more underlying medical conditions equals 37.8. So obviously that 37.8 is included in this 83.1 here, okay? So that makes sense. This 83.1 includes that 37.8. All right, so as we look at this and we say, well, you know, what was really going on here? I think we can clearly see that that if you're under the age of 65, having any comorbidities at all was a really significant driver here. So 83.1% of everybody who died under the age of 65 had a comorbidity. Interestingly, that actually drops as you head out here a little bit. So only for over 65, it was only 74.1. So there's more people who had one comorbidity, and then there were people over the age of 65. So age itself is a factor. Comorbidities are a factor. So age itself was probably the number one determinant, but under that, it goes into these comorbidities. And so what are those comorbidities? Well, the biggies are cardiovascular disease, diabetes, and the chronic kidney disease. Those would be three big, giant ones right there. Interestingly, obesity. That was the other big one. So those were the major ones, but all of these actually count. So cardiovascular disease, diabetes, of course, chronic kidney disease, as we said, end-stage renal disease, chronic lung disease, neurologic conditions, immunosuppression, chronic liver conditions, and obesity. So when we think about this statement by Mike Parsons, they're going to go home and they're going to get over it. Well, maybe not grandma or grandpa if they're sitting at home with one of these things, and as well, maybe not the kids if the kids have any of these conditions. So the CDC also released a pretty big, and they do this pretty regularly, we're looking at now deaths by age. And what do we see here? Under the 1 year of age so far, there have been 9 deaths attributed to COVID-19 out of, in this sample period, which is this calendar, up to through this calendar year, 7,500 infants under the age of 1 year have died. From 1 to 4 years, just 8. 5 to 14 years, just 14. And 15 to 24 years, just 157. And 25 to 34, 844 deaths so far. 35 to 44, we're starting to jump here at 2,100. So you can see it's basically roughly tripling for each 10 years here. That's a tripling. That's just 2.5 times. That's a doubling almost, and then we're starting to slow down a little bit. But there is an increase that comes through that range right there. And so 6,000 deaths from 45 to 54 and 14,000 deaths 55 to 64, then 25,000, then 32,000, then 40,000, summing up as of the time this data was collected, 121,000 COVID-19 attributable deaths out of total deaths in all age categories, about 1.39 million or so. So about 10% of all deaths being attributed to COVID-19. So obviously people dying from a lot of other things. All right. So this raises for me the question of, if you're younger and you get this, what's it like? For most, we sometimes end up with the news stories about people who got it really bad and got a really horrible case. But for most people, what is that case actually like? Well, we're going to turn now to Dr. Glenn DeSandre, and he's going to tell us about his account of having COVID-19. And I think you'll find this really illuminating, and it's great to hear from a doctor what they're doing about it, what their experience was. So let's turn to Dr. Glenn DeSandre now, and I'll be right back with you. With us now to discuss his experience, his personal experience with COVID, Dr. Glenn DeSandre, neonatologist. Glenn, thanks so much for being with us today.
I'm happy to be here. Thank you for inviting me.
Oh, my pleasure. And thanks again for choosing to do this. People are really dying to know what the experience is like for those who haven't had it. And there's even people out there saying this isn't really a thing, all of that. So right to you as a doctor, when did you get COVID and what was it like?
I got COVID very early on in the American pandemic. I got the symptoms first started about March 16th. So very, very soon, actually right at the beginning of the California quarantines and right at the beginning of New York's epidemic. I had traveled the week before to South Carolina with my chorus for some performances, and we knew coronavirus was in the area, but we hadn't started masking yet. We hadn't started doing the social distancing yet. I tried to take as many precautions as I could, wipe down my seat and everything, and was fine when I got back. Then about 7 days later, developed a very low-grade temperature and a little bit of shortness of breath. And I was scheduled to work that day. So I contacted work and said, I don't think I can come to work because I probably have may have symptoms of COVID. And at that time, testing was even more limited than it is now. And so I had a very difficult time getting tested. I got a little bit of the runaround from my physician, infection control, but finally did get tested. That test didn't come back for 7 days, however, because the delay was very long at that time. My symptoms got a little bit better, so I was feeling better after about 2 or 3 days, and was calling work and saying, I think I can come back to work on Friday. But then the following morning, I got the second wave of symptoms, had severe fatigue. I slept probably 20 hours that day and the next day, could barely get out of bed, had difficulty walking up and down the stairs, more shortness of breath, nausea, confusion. So I would try to put numbers into, I was trying to log on to the work conference, and I had to put the code in like 8 times because I just couldn't remember six digits because it was just, my brain was that befuddled. Those symptoms lasted for about 4 or 5 days. And then I slowly got better. So my symptoms lasted only about 10 days in total. With one wave that was very mild. The middle wave was more severe, but fortunately never got to the point where I needed oxygen or was having severe enough respiratory support, distress where I needed to go to the hospital.
So choral, you mentioned singing. We now know singing may well be one of the more effective ways to transmit this.
Yeah, I'm in the San Francisco Gay Men's Chorus. I'm the former president of the chorus and currently on the board of directors. I also sit on our COVID task force. We have 4 physicians and members of the community and members of the staff who are looking at all the data. Because of the risk of choral singing and the reports out of Skagit in Washington, where several chorus members were exposed to coronavirus and actually got infected, and a couple of them passed away, we made the decision to suspend our season at least until January because we're so concerned about the risk to our singers and to our audiences.
Now, do you feel that your own course with COVID, was that very mild, normal? In your experience, what would you say your symptoms were?
Well, by definition, when people are looking at the reports, Mild really is just defined as anybody not needing hospitalization. So mild doesn't mean it's nothing. Mild doesn't mean you're not going to feel terrible. Mild doesn't mean you're not going to have post-COVID syndrome afterwards. Mild just means you're not going to end up in the hospital. And so I would say mine was a average mild case, but wasn't like the flu, wasn't like a cold I'd had before. I've never had an infection that knocked me off my feet for that degree and for that duration.
Worst flu you've ever had so far?
Yes, absolutely.
If we're comparing it. So
right.
Concerns on your side as a doctor, I've been seeing a lot of reports about post-COVID syndromes where people are reporting what appears to be fairly significant damage, even to mild cases, to lungs, heart, kidneys, and maybe neural tissue as well. And what are your concerns there? And
I actually do have some concerns. I have mild asthma myself, but was very well controlled prior to getting COVID. And I've had to escalate my therapeutics because I was noticing more symptoms than I'd had before getting COVID. So I do believe that there is a post-coronavirus syndrome. I haven't had the extreme fatigue. They're reporting fatigue in some patients. They're reporting relapsing remitting disease with recurrent fevers. I haven't had that, but I definitely believe that there's ongoing issues that I've had, and I know I've heard from my colleagues that are in internal medicine that they've seen patients that have had COVID months ago that are still having issues with either fevers or with respiratory distress issues. So I think that part of it is real, but there's more to come because this is a new virus. We're still learning so much about it.
And what are your thoughts? Again, won't hold you to any of this, but that post-COVID syndrome where people have been reporting up to 50, 60, 70 days of mild fevers. In your mind, surely the body must have cleared the virus by now, but maybe not. What are your thoughts there?
Yeah, I think it probably has cleared the virus. I think, I think there's an initial wave, which is with my symptoms was the milder course of disease where my body was fighting off the virus. And then I feel like this virus is turning the body against itself, that it's changing the way the immune system works. So the patients are experiencing the disease as if it was still present, but it's really their own body that's releasing cytokines, releasing immune factors that are causing them to have these fevers. I don't think they're still infectious at this point.
I wouldn't think so either, but I got very concerned when, of course, this thing has supernatural ability to bind to the ACE2 receptor, but we've also seen that it can bind to and apparently enter cells through the CD147, which means we've got T cells potentially involved, and neuropilin-1, which means nerve tissue, which might explain the anosmia and the loss of taste and smell. We don't know yet. In your estimation, how long are we going to be wrestling with trying to figure this thing out?
Everyone keeps talking about the vaccine being the magic bullet, and in 12 to 18 months things will go back to normal. I don't see that happening. There's emerging evidence that immunity may wane. There's a couple of case reports of patients who have gotten a second course of coronavirus after several serial PCRs that were negative. So I feel like this is going to be sort of like the influenza phenomenon. Every year the influenza strain changes, and every year they have to sort of change the vaccine. I think this is going to be something like that. So I think we're going to be dealing with this for years to come.
Yeah, well, we've certainly seen that when we track people with typical coronaviruses, the HCQ9, the other variants like that their antibodies wane very, very quickly. Like a 50% reduction in 6 months, and then within 4 years they're gone. So for whatever reason, coronaviruses don't create a persistent B cell, antibody response. T cells, we don't know. We're learning. Right. Looks like they're important. All of that, but your sense is that maybe this is going to be just like the other coronaviruses we do have experience with, which says the body fights them a little bit differently. We don't, it's not like you get your measles and a booster and you're good for life, right?
Absolutely. I completely agree with that.
Are you concerned about getting it a second time?
I am. When I had my first antibody test and I had antibodies, I was reassured. I was like, great, I'm safe. I still was doing all the precautions, still wearing the mask, still doing social distancing. But as I'm learning more about the case reports of documented secondary infections, it makes me a little more concerned. And I'm just being more vigilant with hand washing, wearing my mask, social distancing, and those things. Yeah,
so explain that. When you go out in public now, do you always wear a mask?
I always wear a mask, yeah. The only time I don't wear a mask is if I'm doing like an outdoor exercise. So if I'm doing a vigorous walk, I will bring my mask with me. And if I get within 6 feet of somebody, or there's a path that I have to get very close to someone, I'll just put the mask on quickly and then take it off as soon as I get past them.
Yep.
But, to go to the store, to go to, to run any other errands, to go to work, I always wear my mask.
Yeah. And what about a lot of confusion on our end over here about how persistent this thing is on surfaces. So at the beginning of this, a lot of people would go to the grocery store and wipe everything down before it came into their house. That's one level. I never made it quite to that level. I think I tried that for a week or so and gave up.
Yeah, I never got to that level either. I would go to the grocery store, put my groceries away, wash my hands, and I'm not that concerned about the duration of virus on my cantaloupe.
Yeah. Okay. So you got it in March 16th. You said we've learned a lot since then. What would you do differently if you came down with it again?
I think what I would do differently, even before I came down with it, was if I known, hindsight's 2020, is I would have worn a mask on the trip. I may not have gone on the trip. At the time, the case burden was very low, so I thought, well, my risk of getting exposed to somebody with coronavirus is low. And I should also say, as an aside, I didn't come in contact with anyone who had a cough or sneeze or anything. So I think I got exposed via asymptomatic transmission. So, just thinking like I'm going to avoid sick people isn't the way to go. Masking is the better thing. So I would definitely wear a mask. And then, just in terms of what I would have done differently, I think I would have just maybe anticipated the second wave and not sort of felt like I was out of the woods after the first phase, and just really anticipated it coming and sort of being hunkered down for a sort of longer course.
Yeah, that's been something that's been fairly consistent, is that if you do get it, make sure you got a good support system, because very typically, if you're going to take that bifurcated course to the worst, that happens around day 7 or 8, it seems.
Absolutely.
We'll report like, oh, I was feeling a little better, and then get rocked. And need a lot of care. And as well, back in March, we were even getting advice like, don't take ibuprofen. Certainly there weren't steroids involved, and standard of care was very different. Now we understand, of course, yes, controlling the body's overreaction to this seems to be the thing we need to do. Is there anything we're going to treat at home? Is there anything you would advise people to do at home that they could do to sort of tamp down that cytokine storm, or that sort of shorthand for a very complex thing that's happening, I guess? Yeah,
and I think what I ended up doing, and what I would recommend is I took Tylenol. I did take ibuprofen at the time, even though I read the case report out of Europe. But I think just suppressing the immune system. I also felt that staying hydrated for whatever reason really made me feel better. So for a couple of days, I was feeling poor, and then I started drinking electrolyte-laden solutions, and that really sort of made me feel a lot better. So I think that for whatever reason was beneficial to me. So I've been recommending that to my friends who've gotten COVID since then.
And how many people do you know who've gotten COVID?
I know 6 people. 5 of them are chorus members. 1 is my husband, who got it after I did. And so all have had fairly mild cases. None of my contacts have gotten hospitalized with the coronavirus.
Yeah. And anybody have any lingering effects at this point? Maybe loss of breath?
Not that I've heard of, no. My husband had anosmia, but it only lasted about a month. So he felt better otherwise, and then couldn't smell for the following month. And that finally came back about a month ago.
Well, good, because I've heard that that's one of the more tragic things that can happen.
Yeah, he likes wine, and so it was very, very sad to him to not be able to taste the good Pinot we had bought. So.
You just pour the cheap stuff into the good bottle, and how would you?
I was just giving him the crap, and I was just taking the good wine. So.
Well, thank you so much for taking the time to talk with us today. It really helps to put a face to all this. But I mean, final comment to people who say this isn't really a thing and they're fighting the whole mask wearing stuff. What are your thoughts?
This is definitely a real virus. I think if we all mask, this pandemic will be tamped down much quicker than if people decide to go out without a mask. The data shows that if at least 90% of us are wearing our masks, we could potentially get the virus spread in the community down significantly, and it will make it better for all of us. So a little bit of short-term suffering will result in longer-term benefit to everyone.
Thank you. I couldn't agree more. And Doctor, thank you so much for your time today. Really appreciate it.
Thank you. Have a good day.
Well, I found that really illuminating, and Glenn was really just very wonderful in sharing his time and experience with us. And I would like to echo what he said in there, that taking secondary precautions actually is now still a thing for him because, as a doctor, he's not sure. Maybe you can get it a second time. We're getting more and more data that you can get it a second time, that yes, this is a thing. Here's another story just came out on July 19th. So that's 2 days ago here. Israeli doctor reinfected with coronavirus 3 months after recovering. The story reads, and it's a little bit confusing how they wrote this, or at least it's confusing what the hospital spokesperson said, but let's go through it and we'll see if we can unconfuse it. A doctor at Sheba Medical Center in Tel Hashomer tested positive again for the novel coronavirus 3 months after initially recovering from the disease. The doctor tested positive again because she has remnants of her first virus still floating around in her body, a hospital spokesperson told the Jerusalem Post on Sunday. I'm going to come back to that. Don't let that confuse you. We'll get back to it. The doctor suffered from fever, cough, and muscle pain when she tested positive for the virus in April, but she recovered and tested negative in May and June. So 2 months of testing, still negative. Earlier this month in July, she came in contact with a confirmed patient and subsequently tested positive for the virus. The cases are the latest in a series of incidents of suspected reinfection that have raised questions concerning how long immunity against the virus lasts. So I think, just me, that if you test positive, and so you test positive for the virus in April, but then you test, let's make that a little positive sign. Then you test negative in May and June, negative signs, and then you test positive again. That I don't think is consistent with that you just have remnants of the virus floating around in the body. But if it is, let's just take it at face value. Let's imagine that this doctor got it, seemed to recover from it, felt better, but now has just all the symptoms again, feels terrible, tests positive again, and that's just due to fragments in the body. That's not also too encouraging because it means, as Glenn hinted, there's a thing called post-COVID syndrome. Now, where some people seem to take a really long time recovering from this thing. And some people are reporting 30 days, 40, 50, 60 days, 70 days, low-grade fever, just feeling trashed by this thing, just like having the flu for like months on end. So one of two things has happened with this doctor. Either they have this post-COVID syndrome, which is what the hospital seems to think they want you to have, what that is, or this testing data where they tested positive, then negative, and then positive again, seems to indicate that they caught it a second time. And there's a reason to suspect that that could be the case. This is a little faster than I would think. So if you recover in May, June, July, that's just barely 3 months. So this really incredible study came out. I want to walk you through this. And this comes to us out of Amsterdam. And it's a really amazing study. Coronavirus protective immunity is short-lasting is the title. Here's why it's amazing. It's because let's look at how they set this study up. I mean, this is the kind of science I love, all right? This is good, solid work, and it's patient work, and it's just amazing. Quote, in the current COVID-19 pandemic, a key unsolved question is the duration of acquired immunity in recovered individuals. The recent emergence of SARS-CoV-2 precludes a direct study on this virus, but the 4 seasonal human coronaviruses may reveal common characteristics applicable to all human coronaviruses. We monitored healthy subjects over a time span of 35 years, from 1985 to 2020, providing a total of 2,473 follow-up person months, and determined, A, the time to reinfection by the same seasonal coronavirus, and B, the dynamics of coronavirus antibody depletion post-infection. 2 things there, time to reinfection and the dynamics of antibody depletion post-infection. An alarmingly short duration of protective immunity to coronaviruses was found. Reinfections occurred frequently at 12 months post-infection, and there was for each virus a substantial reduction in antibody levels as soon as 6 months post-infection. What do I love about this study? Oh my God, how patient. 35 years. That's amazing. 2,473 follow-ups. And this is just to study coronaviruses. This isn't some other work that they shoehorned to fit the COVID thing. This is what the work they had been doing very patiently for decades. And let's look at the duration and results here. So 10 total subjects were followed. Oops, don't want that pen. I want my yellow one. 10 total subjects were followed here, and they started them all in or around 1985, one in 1986 here. They ended in 2017, 2020, 2010, 2003. So those are the study ends right there for them. People all started were in their 30s or 40s, roughly, and they ended in their 50s and 60s, more or less. The follow-up period was 22 years, a short of 11 years. That's how short that one was. 21 years, 28 years, and so on. And so that's how long they studied all these people for. And guess what? In coronavirus infections, patient 1 had a total of 14 coronavirus infections. These are the 4 different types of common cold coronaviruses. You may have heard these names before: NL63, HKU1, 229E, OC43. Those are the 4 Bs. And so this person, patient 1, had NL63 4 times over this 22-year span. They had this one 3 times, this one once, and this one 6 times, for a grand total of 14. As we look down this table, this healthy person only had 3 colds that were measured over the entire 12-year span of their time. What's the high here? I guess it's 22 over this 19-year span and 22 over this 28-year span. So they're getting them pretty frequently, a total of 132 total infections across these 10 people, across these 10 to 20, almost 30 years. All right, so great study, amazing to see with that duration. This is out of all the human coronaviruses total. This is all 10 patients. These are different infections that showed up in each of those 10 patients. And these are 6-month windows, 0 to 6 months to 12 to 18, 24. So that's time between infections in months. So you can see that there's really no 6-month window. Yep, there is. There's one right there where these people didn't get any particular coronavirus. And as well, kind of interesting to note that most of the infections are clustered on this left side of the chart over here. I'm going to have to think on that one for a bit. And then you can see the different types of ones that they got. So this is the most uncommon one to get, the HCOV, HKU1. And these were the more common ones to get right here. So here is one of the punchlines, was that the majority of people lose over 50% of their antibodies by 6 months. So this green would say a 50% depletion. And we can see here by 6 months, this is 50% of the people would have lost 50% of their antibodies. So actually it's much higher. It's more like, I'm going to guess 70% of the people have lost at least 50% of their antibodies by 6 months in. And as well, when you go out by 12 months, it's whatever we're up to there, just guessing something like 85% or so have lost at least 50% of their antibodies. And where do you see the 75% depletion in blue here by 4 years? The vast majority of people have lost almost all of their antibody protection out here by 48 months in, so 4 years. So this is a dynamic that they're seeing across all these different types of coronaviruses. This is why we think that people may be getting reinfected with COVID, experiencing COVID again, getting reinfected with SARS-CoV-2, I should say more accurately, because for whatever reason, the way nature's worked all this out, our bodies do not hold on to long-lasting antibody protection against coronaviruses. Maybe we just figured out a long time ago that coronaviruses are pesky, but not that bad, so don't worry about it. And so the body hasn't worried about it, and maybe that'll change. As well, we talk about the summer lull. They had another really interesting piece of data in this same paper that we've been going through here. This argues that there will be no summer lull, or if there is, if we are in a summer lull right now, that this fall and winter going to be a little bit more awful. And so what you're seeing here is the prevalence of infection, that's in a percentage basis, over time, which is the months down here. And you see that these all sort of have a shape like this right here, where there is a lull at some point and then the prevalence of the infection kicks back up again. And generally speaking, where is that lull? Well, it's out here sometime, between July and September. So this data just argues that if this coronavirus behaves like other coronaviruses, if SARS-CoV-2 behaves like HKU1, 229E or any of these other ones like that, then we really might expect that we are going to see a pickup in cases again in the fall. And that may be true. We don't know. For all these other countries out there as well, we're not sure. Maybe they experienced an earlier summer lull, as it were. We don't know. So much we don't know about this yet, and that's just unfortunate because we're coming back to school, which is going to be a feature of one of these video updates very soon because we got to talk about that here in the United States. For sure. All right, conclusions for today. We have nearly 15 million confirmed cases worldwide. The pace of new cases is currently accelerating, mostly due to a couple of big countries that are really pouring on the cases right now. United States, India, Mexico, places like that. Yes, Virginia, COVID-19 is real. Yes, we should continue to take it seriously. That's what Dr. Glenn DeSandre, I hopefully helped us all appreciate a little bit more. Even if you've had it, however, you still have to remain cautious. You got to remain cautious. That means hand washing. It means wearing masks out in public. It means all of that. But it's just caution. That's all. Just remaining cautious. Don't let your guard down. And that would mean, yeah, you wash your hands after every time you touch a non-clean surface. That's job one. Wearing a mask in public, hey, that protects other people from you and protects you from me, right? All right, unfortunately, coronavirus infections generate really short-lived antibody responses, and really unfortunately, people catch the other coronaviruses over and over again, and that leads us to the observation that some people are catching COVID-19 again, it seems to be. But if we look at this data a little bit, we can clearly see that it's not even Steven. Some people only get it very infrequently. Some people seem to catch colds more often. Maybe that's the same with SARS-CoV-2 as well. We'll just have to sort of work that out. But remember, in the United States, at least, it really didn't have to be this way. We had all this information out there way back in February. We were talking about this. We were able to put out what should have been good, solid, alerting information way back then. But it's unfortunately, we haven't quite got to really taking this seriously yet here in the United States. Not in a way that you could really trust it. Across the whole country, pockets are doing great. Pockets are doing really badly. We are lacking a national strategy that makes a lot of sense at this point in time. So wearing masks, that'd be great. But truthfully, this was all so preventable. So kudos to whoever put up that billboard. Works for me. Remember, you can, if you get one of our t-shirts, join the movement of resilience and common sense, those two sorts of things coming along. And you send a pic to info@peakprosperity.com. It'll go up on our Instagram page. Here's some recent editions. So what's today's edition? We'll call it the beard edition. We're seeing a lot of beards, a lot of white beards. Look at these tomatoes over here. Those are amazing. Those look good. And milking goats, fantastic. Love seeing that. And potatoes. Look at the potato harvest. That's awesome too. Everything here is good. Love all of these pictures. So keep them coming, and love seeing them. And we'll just keep posting all of them because these are just happy pictures to me. Look at that. Chickens, dogs, all the greenery, tomatoes, gardens, all kinds of good things going on. And people are really getting in with the whole resilience movement at this point in time. So that too is going to be a subject of a lot of things we have going on. Remember, you still have time to plant a garden. You can always sneak in a few extra things. I just put some seeds in the ground yesterday for things that I want to have as a fall crop. And when we talked about the terrain, you're going to boost your terrain. Remember, you got to make sure you have plenty of D3. That's a very important thing. Zinc is really important to have in your system. Quercetin helps it get inside the cells. Having selenium in there, very important. If you do feel that scratch in your throat, remember, you want to have elderberry syrup right there. This is my favorite brand right here. N-acetylcysteine, vitamin C for fighting the cytokine storm. If you get there, you're treating it at home. Most people treat COVID-19 at home. Make sure that you are giving your body every chance it can to fight off COVID-19 successfully. All right, and remember, if you have to, resubscribe to this channel, resubscribe to @ChrisMartinson over at Twitter. Why? Well, because people get unsubscribed all the time. So just do that if you need to. And otherwise, I will be back with you on Thursday. So thanks so much for listening. We'll be back next time. Bye-bye.
Hi folks, this is Adam Taggart, Chris's co-founder at Peak Prosperity. To get your own Resilient shirt, simply go to peakprosperity.com/shirts. Each shirt is made of 100% organic cotton and produced in the USA. And when your shirt arrives, please send us a photo of you wearing it if you feel comfortable doing so. We'll add you to our wall of proud Peak Prosperity members who are showing the world that resilience is the way to a better future. Thanks for watching.